Hello, everyone. You'll probably notice my skeleton earrings, meaning that it's the Astro Bodies show where we talk about bodies and astrology. I'm inhabiting my Scorpio body right now, and Nate is inhabiting his Taurus body right now. You'll notice he's got the brown, earthy tones, and I've got the blacks of Scorpio. Um, so Nate, are having you on the show because we want to talk about bodies and sexuality today, which is a large part of your work. So tell us about what do you do with Astro Erotica and Astro Erotics?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, astroerotics is really it's a way to address things that come up in desire in people's sexual lives and people's and not just limited to the what we might think of as the act of sex, but I think their desire lives and their relationship lives in general. When we think about like what it means to be erotic or what the erotic force is all about, right? That applies to so many areas of life where it's just this kind of like responsiveness to life. So we use in astroerotics, we talk a lot about sex and we explore pleasure in different ways. But it could because sex brings up so much for us, for people. It's such a juicy topic. But it's really about sort of how do we bring the erotic into our relationship with life and with the world. So that can look like, that can look just like a conversation, talking with a client about their chart and uh, about the way that their different placements address their particular version of eroticism. Like when I started astroerotics, the first course I ever taught on it was actually called Erotic Styles because I thought of like the different signs, the different zodiac signs in astrology as kind of like different styles of erotic expression. I mean, that's not just me, we talk a lot about the signs as styles. Um, so it can look like talking with a client about their Venus or Mars placements, since Venus and Mars, have so much to do with sexual chemistry and what that's all about. It can look like I use it a lot as a framework for working with couples as well in synastry and in composite charts to address different nuances that come up in relationships. It can also look like this kind of spiritual counsel to someone in terms of what is their combination of energies in terms of masculine and feminine, not to be like gender binary or bioessentialist about it, but in terms of how is your soul called to express this different configuration of energies in the context of intimacy and sex and erotic relating. And it also finally looks like group contexts, which is both online classes that I teach with cohorts where they're actually engaged in creative projects about the different planetary erotic styles, They have like a different assignment every week that they do a kind of creative project on. And in-person stuff where people are kind of exploring these different kind of bodily methodologies that are informed by all of the signs and the planets in terms of erotic expression. So it's very layered, in terms of conversations and creative experiments, individuals, couples, and group work online and in person. So I hope that broadly answers your question.
Yeah, I remember when you taught a class in the Moira Press. It was one of our favorite classes that we had here, and it was you took us through a series of kind of little kind of workings with the planets of like maybe it's Mercury, and you'd say like what mentally drives you sexually or erotically, and of course with Mercury we think of like sapiosexual people or people who are turned on by thoughts, kind of thing. Where if somebody had, Mercury rising, they might be more like that. But if they had Venus rising, they might be turned on by beauty or fashion or something like that. But you had us kind of go through these series of kind of little activities and it helped us discover those different parts of our chart. That was a very, very useful workshop. So I do really encourage you, if you are watching, to work with Nate on sexuality. For real, if you're having issues in a relationship or if you just want to discover the potentials in your chart. So Now, to weave it in with the kind of activist work we're doing over here with the Astro Body Show, I just want to talk about it because I mean, the chart in some ways looks at the spirit of sexuality, like the chart is our spiritual layer. But let's talk about the body layer for a second. So, we're kind of trying to smash the idea that all bodies should look one way. So how do you feel that the charts express different body types, and how does that inform sexuality?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, mm. Well, first of all, I agree with you, and I think that's very important work to do too. I'm all about body positivity, and that uh, there's it should never the work should never look like the body must look like this way. Um, in astroerotics, I don't particularly at this point go into body types. I try to steer clear of language that feels kind of boxing or limiting for people. With that being said, that doesn't mean that I will never in the future explore that with the work. I do very much, I like for instance, Judith Hill's book, The Astrological Body Types. I think part of the reason that I like that material is that for listeners, yeah, you're holding it up, representing. For listeners who might not be familiar, it's really just talking about like what are kind of some features of different signs or sign clusters or sort of, what is a lunar person physiologically or morphologically? What's a Jupiterian person? I've noticed that this freaks some people out. Like that book actually in particular, it has been the kind of red line for people who are maybe open to astrology, but not like, astrologers or hardcore astrological enthusiasts. Things like that book are often the red line for them, where they'll be like, wait a minute, you're saying that Pisces always has a most Mona Lisa smile? Like, what are you talking about? Like that's. But I think for me, I appreciate it because I have a background in physical theater and performance, so we just work a lot with like masks and caricatures and like what's the shape of this soul? What is the shape of this person? So this is kind of a roundabout way of answering. I do think that looking at body centers and body maybe, yeah, centers of the body from a somatic point of view. Like, one person might experience their erotic response in like if they're very Aries heavy, like it might be much more in the upper body, right? If someone's very Scorpio heavy, it might be, they might really be connected to that lower center of gravity and stuff. But but I would say that I approach all those things a bit more somatically, and in a way that doesn't make people feel like, oh, this is my body type, this is my body size, this is my body shape, that kind of thing. But I'm curious as to how you work with that material of the body types too, if you want to speak to
Yeah, well,
it.
I think what's really interesting about astrology is that we're looking at how the chart sits in the consciousness of the body, right? So there are some people who have big bodies and are total diva energy, where they're like, I'm big and I'm beautiful, and that's like their Jupiter and Leo rising conjunct to Sun and Jupiter, and they vibe like I'm awesome, I'm beautiful, eat and be merry, and so that they get a big body with that kind of vibe to it, right? And then there's people with bigger bodies who are kind of have closed down aspects of the chart that hate their body. So I think in some ways we can't tell just looking at a person how they vibe about their body, but the chart might show some of that, like where we have blockages and kind of thing. I absolutely think that a person who's big or small can vibe erotically. Like you can be a huge person and be one of the most sexy. I've seen burlesque performers with charts that are just like Venus and Scorpio. Like you can tell that they know that they have sexy energy, basically. And then
Yeah.
there's people who are small and thin who are just like, excuse me, how's it going? And they don't have a vibe to them kind of sexual. So I think one of the things we can break down is this idea that sexiness has to do with size. It has to do more with the chart infrastructure than size. I mean, do you agree with that or no?
Yeah, well, yes, I would, I think I would, I totally get what you're saying. I think I would pivot a little bit and say that I guess the way I approach it is I feel really strongly that like everyone gets to have sexiness and sexual pleasure, sensual pleasure in their life to the extent that they want to. And everyone is it's like that's our birthright. That's how I feel, no matter what size or shape a person's body is. I think that the it factor that you're talking about in the chart, I think that can very much be described. Like there are chart signatures for sexual magnetism or for like different kinds of sexiness, and I think that that is so interesting. Um, yeah, and I think that it has to do with the way I approach astroerotics is like just the way that maybe like in layman's terms people talk about being comfortable in your own skin, like it's like I just in the past year have had so many more white hairs show up in my beard. So there's this aspect of, like our ageist culture that's like, oh, now you look old, kind of thing. Not that anyone said that to me, except for a couple of kids who have like highly overestimated what my actual age is. Um, and but there's this aspect of the voice of our culture that is so biased toward youth and like the worship of the young people as if that's a really realistic thing, right? Astrology also teaches us about the seasons of life, that we can't just be young and in our 20s forever. So this is so, how I feel is that like, do you feel comfortable in your own skin? Like if even if I experience those as we get older, like we can experience sometimes really quick physical changes. And I think that's another important point to make is that astrology is also this dance between change and like the changing and the eternal, right? The changing and the changeless, which I know you and I are also going to talk about in another future conversation more. But so I feel that so when we experience those quick changes in the body, how do I do that and still feel comfortable in my own skin and still feel the way I talk with people about it is like what makes you feel yummy in your own body. It's like I wear certain clothes, it makes me feel like a yumminess in my body. And I think that that does have to do with the chart. It's like helping someone feel really great about their chart placements, actually. Like your soul chose these placements, and that's these placements are an expression of your genius and of your particular brand or style of sexual magnetism. So yes. So
Okay, I have a few things to just say. I've been writing down
yeah.
notes so I don't interrupt you. Okay. One is in teleology, which we're going to discuss next month. It's the map of becoming. The chart is this map of becoming. And I love what you're saying is like all of a sudden we can become gray or we can all of a sudden sprout a belly. And, some people call that menopause. We might say it's transits or whatever. But either way, it's a change on the path of becoming, right? And instead of saying I'm this static thing that should look like I did when I was 20, we should say I am this thing that is becoming a thing that's becoming a thing. Like, so it's like I am my belly in middle age and I was a thin person in my 20s and I am both of those things and I'm becoming more things right now, right? And we
Yeah.
compare it to a plant. Like sometimes when we have existential questions, we compare it to plants in teleology. We'd say, is a plant as thick and robust in its early age as it is later when it's making squash, which are the fruits of its vine. Like I'm making this video with right now, it's a fruit of my vine. I had to eat a snack beforehand to stay robust. Like my plant is getting thicker, it's more robust. Like a plant is spindly when young and then gets thick and robust as it creates fruit so it can hold the fruits of its vine, right? So we can actually
Yeah.
say that the human body might need to get thicker as it's getting older to hold more energy to do its work or something like that. So I
Yeah.
just want to speak to that teleologically to really say that this is an amazing point is like something may sprout upon you that changes your feeling of yumminess and like we need to reclaim that feeling at this current iteration and say my plant is beautiful in this fashion as well. Like,
Yes, thank you. I really feel that. I feel that so strongly, especially right now because people are really struggling with not feeling like so many clients, say I don't feel desirable. I feel like I'm too old. I feel like I'm, not this or that enough, and I think it's a big problem, especially in dating culture and like on the apps and um, how transactional it can all sort of feel because we don't, as I think at large as a culture, we don't have this more nuanced appreciation of beauty or just appreciation of beauty, period, that like much more can be considered beautiful than our current filters will allow us to appreciate. So,
so yeah, I read this statistic the other day that 85% of people have struggled with their body image, whether it be lack of hair, a belly, tallness, shortness, gray hair, or whatever, and that the people who are accepting of themselves have done some work to get there. Isn't that crazy? 85%. So like the work you're doing is such an important work of saying, let's look into your chart and go beyond the body to reclaim your sexuality through this kind of psychic layer. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing. Um,
thank you.
well, okay, so back to the yummy expressions thing. Okay, so it makes me think of dressing to your chart, like dressing to your auric colors. So like I'm dressed in my auric colors as Scorpio and you're dressed in your colors, and we both, I think, I feel pretty yummy right now. No, I don't not feel
Yeah.
yummy, right? Like, do you feel yummy
Yeah.
in your Taurus colors? I don't know.
Yeah, I do feel yummy. I have like these kind of silky fabrics, on me, and it feels all smooth and soft, and yeah, I've always been responsive to that kind of thing, even since I was like 5. And then it was filtered out through cultural indoctrination and stuff. But I really do think that there is. I think you're onto something. Yeah, of course. And I know you talk about I think you talk about this stuff in your book too about color and the sort of dressing your or yeah, attuning to the energy the color scheme of your energy body. I think that's so true. Yes. And that
Yeah, like
does of course.
so much of feeling beautiful has to do with like dressing in the colors of your aura more
Mhm.
than not having a belly or having a belly. Like if you have a big body and you dress it in your color, you will be popping and beautiful. Like so there's a lot of magics we can find in astrology to really like hone in on what makes this soul beautiful. What it's kind of
Yeah.
the magic of that. So just want to speak to.
I agree. I agree. I think yeah, it's you're so well versed in the sort of color correspondences. I've also been doing all this research on like what is a zodiac sign, and I think a lot about shape and gesture. Again, because probably because my background in performance, a lot of it shows up as gesture for me. But even from an astronomical viewpoint, like I think like Aries is this kind of upward and outward thrust. Like it kind of quickly thrusts up into like in the air, and like Leo sort of radiating out from a central point. And so these kinds of to think of other examples like Taurus, gently slopes into a plateau, or how Capricorn crawls in the northern hemisphere and climbs in the southern hemisphere. And these kind of different gestural languages also, have an erotic correspondence. But I'm gonna just remember something that I meant to say before when you first brought this up, which was that yeah, I feel also that different clothes and colors can really bring out someone's sexual yumminess for themselves too. Like that we all have different keys into these different parts of ourselves, and I think clothes, fabrics, and color can do so much for that too. And the chart, I mean, what better map for that than the chart also in
Well,
terms of
so
somebody's energy signature.
so
Uh,
just building on that, I truly didn't mean to interrupt you. There's I used to do this exercise as an artist where I take three colors of a chart, so just whatever the color, it could be like orange for Leo, black for Scorpio, and pink for Libra. I don't know, three colors that you would never put together, but you just have to say, I have to make this chart beautiful. Like as a remediation artist, like I don't get to change the nature of this chart. I have to find some beauty here. So I would do these paintings where I had to use the right proportions or metallics or something to make these three colors beautiful. And that was like an exercise in acceptance and also making everything beautiful under the sun, right? So I do think that part of this work that you're doing with people is doing that, is saying, let's take your chart, whatever it is, and make it, you keep using the word yummy, but like make it palatable, make it beautiful, make it awesome, make it sexy. That is groundbreaking, actually, right? Um, so I have a question for you. What do you
Yeah.
think of dysmorphia? Like body dysmorphia. How does that affect sexuality? And what's the astrology of dysmorphia?
Mm. Wow, that's a big one. Well, I will say I do have to just give a disclaimer in my response to that I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist that would ever, diagnose dysmorphia. That would be qualified to diagnose dysmorphia in our conventional sense of the term. I Well, it makes me wonder about, I think, and I'm kind of I'd be really curious to hear your take and, others' takes on this too. I think that astrology shows so much about that there are different kinds of things, that there are different kinds of conditions and symptoms that often in modern medicine and modern psychology, we might only have one term for them, right? So we might use the term dysmorphia, but I think astrology might show that there are different kinds of dysmorphia, right? This is what's coming up for me now. It's like there's somebody who might just be like, it could be triggered by feeling a complete disconnection from who they are in a body, like who they are as a physically incarnate being. So like being sort of out of touch, or like a sense that like, well, I don't really feel like I'm from here anyway. So how am I going to have like a perception of my body that matches the norm? Then there might be someone else for whom it's like expressed in a way that we're much more conventionally familiar with in modern times. Like, oh, I feel, I am, my body is this, but I see something completely different every time I look in the mirror, and it's from a more watery, emotional place, or from a very heavy, like Saturnian and lunar kind of configuration or aspect. Yeah, I do think in terms of dysmorphia, and in terms of this like constrictive energy toward the body, it makes me think of Saturn, sort of like Saturn moon hard aspects or something like that. But I would need to sort of cook that a little bit more, or process it a little bit more. But based on what I've just said so far, do you have any like takes that you want to talk back on or weigh in on?
Well, this is so cool. I've never had a guest ask me questions back. This is so cool.
Yeah, yeah. I just think so highly of your perspectives as well. So,
No,
yeah.
this is fun. No, I always think of dysmorphia, it would be like dissonance with your like
Yeah.
you're shaped, right? Or like the way, I know we say dysmorphia, it would be dissonance with how you're shaped in a gender or something like that. Like, but I think what I find interesting about this is I believe dysmorphia is cyclical and per the transit, right? So you can have, I agree with you that something like a moon Saturn conjunction could cause a dysmorphia potential, right? Or a sun Saturn conjunction, right? Where it's like you have transits to it. And Leslie Feinberg, who wrote Stone Butch Blues, I don't know if you know that book, but they had
No.
a lot of surgeries and stuff like that. They had a sun Saturn conjunction in Virgo. And so they would go through all these dysmorphias. Like every time there's a transit to it, they're like, I'm not okay in my body. Then they would have a surgery. Then it was like another. And so I think in looking at bodies and discomfort with bodies, people always think a surgery is going to solve the issue. But what astrologers know is that we have cyclical dysmorphia. For a lot of people will get a surgery and then they have more dysmorphia. And the astrologers can help with this because we can say, hey, we are here for the cyclical process of dysmorphia. And, someone like you, Nate, I feel like could help people through those dysmorphic transits, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah, thank
do you,
you. Yeah,
what would your process be to help somebody who was, and then we know you're not a psychologist, you are an astrologer, which is equally a valid
of
consulting
course.
profession. What
Yeah.
approach there?
Well, I think you're right on, first of all, because I do think that it is, of course, it has to be cyclical, right? I love that way of putting it because transits are cyclical, of course. And look, being in a human body is awkward. It's an awkward experience. Let's not kid ourselves. Um, I, but so much of my practice is also about bringing things back to the body. um, because we can sometimes get so as astrologers, we have this really particular use of our brains that I think is so cool. We get into all of these really high, um, sort of just like this, like, astrological knowledge is wild. And so but me, I have so much earth that I have air and earth, right? So I'm trying to ground and sensualize the ideational. And I'm also trying to, I have big opinions about the somatic world, the sort of like, somatic experiencing and things like that, which is all wonderful stuff. But I think that it doesn't give enough credit a lot of times to the imagination and to the realization that the imaginal is also part of our bodily experience. Everything we talk about in terms of astrological stuff right now is part of our physical somatic experience as well. And I think sometimes in our materialistic society, there's still this kind of split between them, even though we're getting more and more conscious of our inner bodily experiences. So my tendency would always be to bring the imagination into the work and to bring the person's body into the work. I would have, I usually, Andrea, I'm trying to like find the way to put it that sort of boils it down. I'm a big proponent of like introducing something kind of outrageous and weird into my sessions with people.
Wow.
Um, and that
Like what?
usually, yeah, yeah. Well, that usually consists of some sort of it's like I'll meditate on a person's chart before I meet with them and also kind of leave that meditative door open, during the session too. Um, and I will bring in some kind of a weird, like weird is a kind of a funny word to use, because it almost sounds vague, but some sort of weird image, but that was a genuine image that came from the meditation I did on the client and on their particular chart signatures. Sometimes like psychic mediums and stuff talk to clients about images or like, oh, I see you, blah, 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 doing such and such. And so it might seem a little bit like that, but it's not because it's usually it's something that reveals itself about the client and about their chart that's not super obvious. It's because it's not super literal usually. But it's like, and I won't like frame the whole session in terms of this thing, but often it's like we'll be having a normal conversation, sort of like you and I are now, and then that will come in as a kind of a curveball and it directly relates to what they're talking about, or to what they're meeting with me about in terms of what the point of the session is. But it steers the conversation or it steers them in a different direction because then it's like, oh, wait, what do you mean that you saw me like flying on a cloud and meeting like a fire serpent, in space or something? And most of the time, like 9 times out of 10, a person has told me, Okay, that's really weird that you saw that because literally 2 days ago such and such happened to me, and and it directly relates to the image that you just said. So okay, so I'll introduce like a weird image into a session if I'm working with a client, and then usually if the client is like ready for this sort of thing, then we'll do something playful with it. We'll do something like so if a person is dealing with a dysmorphia kind of cycle, as we're talking about, then there might be this weird image that pertains to that, but that is I will always ask the chart and like my sort of imaginal faculties, what is going to be most freeing or liberating for the client in terms of what they're going through with this. And then we find the way that really activates that for them the most. Like for one person, like some people are very movement oriented, so they like to move it through the body and like sort of almost try on like acting out that image. Some people like to write, so they like to just like take that as free writing on that piece. Some people like to draw. Some people just like to sort of talk and process and analyze. So I try to be fairly non-directive about it and find the key in for that client. Um, but it's all about, in terms of my spiritual worldview, I'm very much about not destroying the negative, not trying to stuff down the negative, or always taking like an antipathy kind of healing approach. I think I'm more informed by almost the homeopathic ethic of it's like we're transmuting the thing by sort of becoming by having a more playful relationship to it and by bringing in that weird image that somehow I don't know, it somehow acts as this kind of chaos agent that makes things like good, positively wacky and creates change for them. I'll give you one quick example because I know I've been like going on about this for a while, but I'm going to work with a mask maker and a mask designer who lives in Bali, Indonesia, and we're working with and he makes masks actually. He has like a relationship with traditional Balinese mask makers who make masks for like ceremonial purposes and healing purposes, and like the mask becomes a talisman or a form of remediation, right, in your language. And we are actually working on a series of astro-erotic masks together. So we're working, he's designed like a mask for the solar erotic, the lunar erotic, the Saturnian erotic. And so I mean, these are like specifically applied to erotics, but I can see, for instance, if we're bringing up something like dysmorphia, there could be something like that they actually put onto their body. I'm a big proponent of that. That's why I think like gemstone therapy is really interesting, even though I'm not an expert in it. But like those kind of Jyotish remedies and stuff. There's something about putting something on the body is very powerful. Oh yeah, crystals. Yes.
Used this yesterday in a reading. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's kind of a way. And if someone is I do enter astroerotics a lot of times right now through the planets, through their because they give us such a kind of clear archetypal language. So maybe somebody who is having dysmorphia going through that in their cycle of transits. Maybe it's like you mentioned before in your example of Saturn and the Sun, Saturn with the Sun in Virgo. So maybe the Sun needs to be strengthened a little bit in that moment. I mean, we could take other approaches to that placement too, obviously. But so in that case, I might call upon this solar mask and have them put it on, or have them watch me as the astrologer put it on and see and like have them confront that part of themselves, or something. So there's all that, there's all that kind of intricate wackiness and ceremonial kind of stuff. And then there's also the healing aspect of just having a conversation with someone and being a compassionate listener to what they're going through, and finding what has worked for them in the past, and maybe like going through their chart with them and seeing, well, talking through some different placements with them, saying like, what's out of what I've just said so far, what are some of these placements that speak to parts of you that you feel most proud of and that you like the most? And sort of celebrating those parts of them, and then also seeing if we can bring some love for the other parts of them. Like when I first discovered astrology, um, I didn't know that I was a Sagittarius rising, and when I discovered it, it was like, whoa, that makes me curious about astrology now, because it's like Sagittarius feels like an interesting sort of yeah, it's this rugged traveler kind of sign. And I didn't feel as proud of my Taurus sun because I didn't know that much about Taurus beyond like these cultural stereotypes of, Taurus is stubborn and stable and blah blah blah. But then I was so thrilled to find out there's so much more to the Taurus energy. And obviously, and now I feel like crowned in my Taurus placements. I feel so like, yeah, I feel proud of those too. So I think it's also like just this very kind of there's this power in the simplicity of just having conversation with someone and like helping them be more able to love all of themselves or more of themselves and just creating the space where that might be able to happen for yeah.
Oh my God, that was such a brilliant answer. You are so Taurus with your beard, by the way, your beard and your brown. And your tone of voice is so like earthy and Taurus. You're in the sensuality aspect and everything. No, I mean, what I love about what you're saying there is you went into the archetype of like, if we have a sun Saturn, like the sun is being squashed by Saturn. And so putting on that sun mask would be like you need more of yourself in the monitor of like, I am me and I am good. And then I like the idea of like cyclically applying that mask per the transit. I mean, that's where astrological remedy people are a little bit different than your static remedies person is like we come in for the cycles that you're going to go through for the rest of your life. And so I love that answer. I think that was so spot on. And then also the Uranus chaos element. We had a brilliant woman do a class on chaos, Uranus and chaos, and she was talking about how in systems without enough chaos, things get concretized to the point of being unhealthy. It's like a plant where the roots are in the ground and plant can't breathe. Like you need some chaos to pull out that Saturn energy and kind of let it all breathe a little bit. And so I think I really loved your answer on all that. That was so brilliant. Okay, I'm gonna give you another hard one. I'm giving you really
Okay.
hard cases right here. Okay.
This is great. Yeah.
Okay, so what if we have a body that's difficult physically? Okay, because in Ptolemy's four influences on a growing creature, we look at four things. We look at genetic, culture, climate, and the chart. Okay, so what if we
Yeah.
have a genetically difficult body, like
Mhm.
it's has no collagen or there's something about it. It's difficult, what some people would call disabled, or I don't know what the politically correct terminology is for something where we have a body that requires special treatment in order to maybe loosen up and have some sex or whatever. So
Right.
how would you interface that genetic component of what they've got going on with the, cultural and chart layer? How would you approach the eroticism of a situation like that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think it goes back to this thing of we need to have we need to champion tools that are person-centered. Um, and what I mean by that is I think, a lot of times when we talk about sex and like sex tips or pleasure tips or things like that, there's a lot of emphasis on techniques, and techniques can be great, but for instance, when we talk about applying a certain kind of touch or a certain kind of object, that all needs to happen in the context of the specific body that we are and the specific bodies that are in the room with us or body. Um, and that is going to be different for everyone because every body is different. Um, but so I go back to being person-centered, which is what is, hmm, what is the key to pleasure for this person in this moment? And this is a place where the astrology might not might not come in right away, or it might be so like in an astroerotics context, that might have been a conversation we had had beforehand, or it might be integrated or trickled in later on. But um, I think of how like I don't know if I'm not sure you know this about me, but I have a lot of experience as an arts educator in my life working with students with very severe physical disabilities and who are in populations who are maybe in wheelchairs or who are dealing with um, things like the priority for this student right now is to be able to get up and walk across the room without feeling dizzy. It's all kind of like nervous system related things. And I think I think there are things we can see in the chart when we're kind of looking at those challenges, by the way. But I go back to how I think we really have to take a gentle exploratory approach of just how can you access, and pleasure might not even be the right word sometimes for people, because I know sometimes when people are going through either really big physical challenges or have experienced recent physical trauma or emotional trauma, sometimes people can hear the word pleasure and think like, F you, like I don't, pleasure doesn't even feel available to me right now. So if there's just some kind of space for, like right now in our conversation, we're talking about this in the context of bodies that are facing like genetic challenges, like something where they can just land and experience. It doesn't have to be pleasure, like, orgasmic pleasure or something like that, or it doesn't have to mean chasing arousal. It can just be this kind of very light sense of feeling relaxed and feeling safe. One of the one of the big trainings I did in sexuality education was in this practice called Urban Tantra by the educator Barbara Carellas. And I'm a big fan of, I mean, I'm a big sort of s- spokesperson or whatever you might call it for her work. She wrote a book called Urban Tantra, Sacred Sex for the 21st Century. Highly recommend it. She also wrote another one called Ecstasy is Necessary. But anyway, in her training, which I got certified in, she taught us this form of erotic massage called the erotic awakening massage, which um, included some specific kinds of touches that are just like gentle keys into like using your hands and like engaging your hands with another person's body who is in front of you, but none of it is prescriptive. Like you can basically take what works for that person and leave the rest. And it's very much based in a conversation. It's like talking with the person of, oh, what part of your body are you curious about me sort of exploring today? They're free to name, any part of themselves or any part of themselves that's not available. Like this part of me, I do not want you to touch at all. Um, and it's also a form of erotic massage where like you can wear gloves, like safer sex equipment is always supplied. You don't have to get someone else's bodily fluids on you. You don't have to exchange bodily fluids in any way with that person. So why I'm bringing that up in my response to you is because um, it's so customized and conversational and based on where that person is and what is available for them in this moment. There's another thing I'll bring in here, which is a reference to there's a another sex educator named Betty Martin who developed a model called the Wheel of Consent. And she has an exercise that is like the first thing she does in any of her group gatherings with people. It's called waking up the hands, where basically you take any object that's next to you, and you just kind of like right now I just happened to pick up this, pad of post-it notes, and you just start like feeling it on your hands, and you get to a point where you're feeling the thing on your hands, and after a couple minutes, you find some sort of groove where something in your consciousness shifts and you found like a pleasurable way for it to contact your hands in some way. And it's not like, yeah, right, right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's not it's and you have to like spend a bit of time with it to like the first couple minutes you might be like, "Oh, okay, this is boring. Like what am I, why am I just like fidgeting with this in my hands?" But then there's a moment where something shifts and it's like, "Oh, I just I just found a way that this moves on me that feels delightful somehow." And it's not like it might not be like, oh, that feels delightful and now I'm horny or now I'm like, that sort of like sexual response, that kind of pleasure response. I mean, it could be, who knows, right? But it's more just like, what is it like I'm letting myself feel good for no agenda other than feeling good. Um, and sometimes that brings up, by the way, like a lot of different things. That can bring up grief for people. People can start like getting weepy or just feeling sad or feeling like embarrassed and not really knowing why. And it has a lot to do with the ways that we've been indoctrinated to, like the pleasure that we're supposed to allow ourselves versus like, oh no, that's too much. Like that's too much pleasure. Like you're not supposed to let yourself just feel good for no reason. Anyway, so this is all. I would probably in I think it's important to just meet everyone where their body is at. And sometimes that can mean starting just like really small with something really small like that. Um, and I am curious how I think it would be my tendency to always, in those cases, to always bring in the astrological language into what's happening. So that's my starting answer to your question, which is such an important one. Yeah.
So just to kind of sum up what you're saying with the kind of Ptolemy's four influences, it's like you would look at the transits to the chart. It sounds like, if a person with a exceptional body had a transit to their Mars, you might say, okay, you're going to be inclined to be sexual on this transit. And now we need to figure out how your body receives and transmits that energy because with the how it's built. And so I love that idea of like finding the thing and like, how is this feeling good on my body? But we could say with the chart, we know from the impetus from spirit outward that everybody, no matter how it's shaped or how much collagen it has or whatever, has martial inclinations at times or has Venusian inclinations. And so well, that's one thing that astrologers know is that, it makes me think of this time that I was reading a chart for someone with Down syndrome, and the
Mhm.
parents were confounded because they couldn't get me to basically disabilize their child. I was like, well, that's not my job. I'm looking at their spirit. Like, do they want to be a baker? Are they a pet sitter? Like, you can be Down syndrome and have a million different life purposes. Like we don't. It doesn't disallow the spirit to express in all these ways. And so I think we
Yeah.
are very good at not desexualizing people of different bodies, which happens all the time in culture that they get castrated,
Yeah.
conceptually, like all the time. So, I mean, would you agree that people of all body shapes and sizes and inclinations have these sexual impetuses astrologically?
Yes, yes. Can you just repeat that question one more time to make sure
Like,
because my mind is going in like a million directions too, thinking about what you're saying. So just repeat that
so I
again.
guess, I guess, do you agree that astrologers would say that a person, whether they're not able-bodied, disabled, big, small, if they you can have sexual urges according to the chart, no matter the body shape or
Oh yeah. Yes, I would agree. Definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
And I also agree with you that it's cyclical and that yes, there are I was even thinking of examples from my own life when you were talking about Mars. Of course you're going to be inclined to be more martial or more Mars driven sexually at this time and how might we find outlets for that and thank you because and you also gave the language to it of going from spirit first and the way spirit wants to express, which I think is the phrase you used, which is such a beautiful phrase. In my initial response to your question, I was kind of going from the body to spirit, and then you brought the missing piece back in, which is going from spirit back into its expression, which is what we do as astrologers. So, yeah. So thank you for that. Mm.
Interesting. Okay, man,
Yeah.
you get these hard questions. Oh, sorry, were you gonna say
Love
something?
these. No, I love these hard questions. No, I might something else. I feel like there's something else regarding this whole that whole line of inquiry with like bodies and with these body with like these bodies facing particular challenges and cycles, but it might come back in later. So let's move on to what you wanted to ask next.
Okay. The next one is a little bit less identity politics and just kind of a fun one, that has to do with bodies and how people are built. So how would you speak to different charts having different kinks? And what is that astrologically?
Mm-hmm. That is a fun one. Yeah. Well, we talk a lot about kinks in terms of in my Astro-Erotics class series, we do talk a lot about kinks in terms of the different signs, different sign expressions, um, and and different planetary expressions too. Like there are times when we talk, like, for instance, we talk about cancer and this sort of encasement or like being like soaked in water, or like in a case of water or things like that, and and how this can be a very Cancerian kink, or just being held, and like aftercare and those kinds of things. Or we've explored Taurus and orgasm control or edging, like Taurus builds it kind of builds its erotic energy, and then we get to a certain plateau and we edge, and instead of just like releasing and dispersing, we just like edge that. So that those are just a couple of different examples of, yeah, we talk about different signs as connected to different kinks. And I think also a sort of perspective I want to invite people into, because a lot of times people who end up in my group classes are people who are sort of exposed to the kink world already, is that maybe sometimes people look at kinks as a certain set of behaviors or set of fetishes or things like that. And in astroerotics, we're really moving into looking at sort of sexual fetishes or sexual dynamics as these realms, almost like landscapes or environments. So you might have a connection with someone. You say that your connection with your current partner or one of your current partners, if you're polyamorous, is say that like you have a very Neptunian connection, and say that that is so Neptunian Neptunian kinks could include, everything from a really masochistic kink, like you want someone to constantly be demanding things of you romantically and like demanding this devotion, or maybe it feels kinky itself to feel so devoted and like have this partner on a pedestal, whether they're your dom or what or not, just like someone who is like your mate, I'm so devoted to you, that sort of thing. And maybe that is very different from a past partner or from another partner who your erotic connection to them is very mercurial. It's like, oh, we sext sometimes, and that might be a kink. That might be like if some people are really into sexting, or we have really quick encounters where we like check into a motel or a hotel and we're there for an hour or two or 30 minutes or whatever, and then we disperse and we go away. Like that's very mercurial. And that's different from the Neptunian one. And it's different from like a Plutonian one that can be very obsessive and deep and dark and passionate, and sometimes have some element of like biological, some kind of biological element or urge, or like the sort of like even to the point of procreation or something like that attached to it. Or like solar sex, so the solar erotic, we talk about exhibitionism and voyeurism and how that's a big thing with the sun is like I want to be seen, I want to exhibit myself. Yeah, see me in all my beauty and all that. Or I mean I could go through like lots of them. I could or like Mars, we're always either doing it or we're fighting and arguing, or hate sex is a big kink for some people too, which is very Martian, very martial.
Oh
So
my God, that's a
yeah.
good remedy for Mars hates.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's a big fantasy for people who read and people talk a lot about enemies to lovers fan fiction, like they're
Uh,
like erotica or romance novels where people start out as enemies and like, wanting to kill each other or something, but then they end up being lovers, that sort of
my God.
something very Mars Pluto about that.
Oh my God, absolutely. Well, I
Yeah,
think you don't have to go through your whole lecture here because we have 2 minutes. We want to
yeah,
make sure people know how to
yeah.
find you. But this was such a fruitful conversation. I just really learned a lot from your answers, and I hope that you feel like we utilized you for what you are here to do. Okay,
Definitely.
how can
Yeah.
people find you to do work with you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm on social media. You can find me on Instagram at weirdastrobody or weird.astro.body. You can find my website, weirdAstrobody.com. Yeah, my Substack is where I publish pretty regular forecasts and horoscopes and things like that. So then you have an opportunity to read longer form things that I write, weirdAstrobody.substack.com. And yeah, I'm on TikTok as well and Facebook, Nate Speare, Natespeare. And that seems to pretty much cover it, I think.
Will you send me an email with when we hang up, will you send me an email with all of your links so that I can put them in the
Yeah,
thing? And then also if you want me to send you a gift, send me I mean I think I did get your mailing address so I can send you a gift. I think I got that already. But if I don't
yeah,
have it, make sure I can send you something because I'm so appreciative for this. But
yeah,
I do want to get all of those things in the link so that people can find you.
definitely. Yeah, will do.
All right, and so you guys look for Nate next month where we're going to be talking about souls and teleology, and so we're going to be going outside of his erotic work into his more philosophical side, and we so appreciate you, Nate. Thank you so much for coming on.
Likewise, I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
All right, see you on Facebook.
All right, see you soon.